The 1956 NBA All-Star Game took place on Tuesday, January 24, 1956, and featured Hall of Famers like Bob Cousy, Dolph Chase, and Neil Johnston. This was the sixth All-Star Game. Took place at the Rochester Royals home court, the Rochester Community War Memorial Coliseum. Once again, home court went to the Western Division, so the West was wearing the white jerseys and the East was wearing the blue ones. Still the same six-star jersey from 1952. After the first 5 All-Star games, George Mikan was all-time leading scorer by 6 points. Mikan had just lost the top rebounder spot to Dolph Chase by 1 rebound in 1955, and Bob Cousy had 33 assists over 5 games. In 1955, none of the single-game records were broken, so we still had Paul Arizin at the top of the leaderboard with 26 points in the 1952 game. So up until this point, there had still never been a 20-rebound All-Star game or 20-assist All-Star game either. And the East had a 4-1 record with a 2-game winning streak and the reigning All-Star MVP, Bill Sharman. Bob Pettit and Clyde Lovett from the West are 2 of the 3 top scorers in the league, but Paul Arizin and the East have more high-scoring players overall. Chase and Neil Johnston led the league with 11.1 rebounds per game, and Maurice Stokes is just behind with 10 rebounds per game, and he's a rookie. Bob Cousy just decided to always be good at averaging over 6 assists per game, so he leads the league again with Jack George and Tom Gola of the Warriors both second with just under 6 per game. But only Jack George has been selected as an All-Star this year. So how could the West even the scoring board? It had been a bad year for the West. Only one team was over 500, and that was by only 4 games. The 56 Hawks are good on defense and bad on offense. They have 2 guys who shoot over 39%, which is insane. The Hawks have 2 quality centers and then a whole bunch of other dudes to pass the ball to the 2 quality centers. The best of those this year is Bob Harrison. We get his first All-Star selection. Pettit and Cher have the most offensive and defensive win shares on the team. This doesn't mean that the rest of the team is bad. It just means that the team style relies on them. But yeah, I think it's pretty obvious to see that Bob Pettit is kinda the MVP of the team. And he was also MVP of the NBA. The first ever MVP went to the guy on this team. Bob Pettit is averaging 24, 8, and 1 on his second season. Top scorer in the league, and his team sucks, but he is playing good offensively and defensively. All he needs is a team around him, and I'm sure he could be a champion. Pettit was also the cousin of Frankie Bryan, who is a 2-time All-Star in some of the first All-Star games. Frankie Bryan is currently in the Prestons in 1956. This makes them the first active relatives where they are both All-Stars. The other All-Star is Bob Harrison. First of all, rest in peace Bob Harrison. He actually only passed away a few months ago at 96 years old. This season he was 28 years old, and after 6 seasons in the NBA he's finally found himself on the Hawks, where he finally gets to be an All-Star. He must have a good personality, because scoring-wise he was quite inefficient, scoring 10 points per game on 10 shots per game. But he was good on defense. The 56 Lakers featured George Mikan. He literally came back after retirement. The only problem is that now he is washed. Because he is washed, the Lakers still suck this year. The last championship they won, 2 years ago, their new star Clyde Lovellette was the backup center for George Mikan. It was beautiful. This season George Mikan is backing up to Clyde, but it's just not the same. Vern Mickelson and Slater Martin are the other All-Stars on the Lakers, but it's not the same team since Jim Pollard has retired. Mikan may be washed, but in 1956 he's also kind of an All-Star snub, because look at those numbers: 10, 3 and 1 on 44% shooting. After 2 years as a snub, Clyde Lovellette finally gets to be an All-Star after averaging 22, 5 and 1 for an entire season. It's the Lakers' best player this year. He was the first basketball player in history to play on an NCAA championship team, Olympics gold medal basketball team, and NBA championship squad. Lovellette and basketball legend Dean Smith were teammates at Kansas. He is still the only college player to lead the nation in scoring and win the NCAA title in the same year. At the pro level, Clyde became one of the first big men to move outside and utilize the one-handed set shot that extended his shooting range and offensive repertoire. So this is basically 1950s spacing, so he could play with Mike Ken. 1956 Vern Mikkelsen was no longer required to score multiple buckets to win, so his effectiveness has gone down, but he's still an all-star. 30-year-old, 5'10" Slater Martin has put in another good solid season. Career high in assists. He was supposed to retire but now all-star. The Rochester Royals were trash last year, so they got a whole bunch of good draft picks, a whole bunch of young players, and luckily one of them has sprouted. Maurice Stokes leads the team in points, rebounds, and assists in his first season, so obviously is an all-star. Bobby Wanzer, from their first championship team 5 years ago, is still an all-star after a long time, and another rookie, Jack Twyman, is an all-star snub. Maurice Stokes is just a rookie, but he's already almost leading the league in rebounds at 6'7". He's more of a defensive superstar but still leads the Royals in points. Bobby Wanzer was a super effective guard in the early 50s, but now he's become washed, and he's also the coach of the team. I think that played a role as to why he's still in the game. He averages 8 minutes per game, but his PR is still high because his minutes pretty effective. He's doing in 8 minutes what other players on his team are doing in 25. This was his last All-Star season as well, but he would eventually make it to the Hall of Fame, so he was okay. The Pistons just lost the NBA Finals and now have a big three of superstar center Larry Faust, and forwards, George Yardley and Mel Hutchins. This big three is dominant both offensively and defensively. They even have Bob Hubbregs coming off the bench. That's right, the backup center is a monster too. This is the best team in the West, and they rightfully make the finals again this year, losing to whoever wants to actually win the championship from the East. Larry Faust is having a better season than last year. He plays about 4 minutes less, but he is basically putting up the same stats. George Yardley had a career-high season in points and assists per game. He slightly improved. Mel Hutchins, another guy with a future All-Star relative, at 27 years old he's had a career-high in field goal percentage. Inversely, the East, who are on a 2-game win streak, had all of the good teams. Only one of their teams was under 500, and that was by only 3 games. So every team in the East was better than every team in the West. In fourth place in the East is the reigning but not really defending champions, the Syracuse Nationals. And all I can say is it's not looking good, Brev. Red Kerr and Paul Seymour were the only help that Dolph Chase had last year, and that was enough to win the championship. Sadly, this year both players have regressed, so others have had to step up. But Chase is still good and the Nationals are still champions, and they barely under 500 at this point. 2 All-Stars. Dolph Chase is leading the Nationals in points, rebounds, he is third in assists, and also leads them in shooting percentage. He's one of the best players in the league, but he's on the Nationals, so that means he's not allowed to repeat as champion. Red Kerr was one of the first NBA Iron Men in the early years of the league. He played 917 consecutive games from 1954 to 65. A record that stands for the next 17 years, was also the first ever coach of the both Chicago Bulls and the Phoenix Suns. Just last season, Red Kerr had been part of the core championship team as a rookie who dominated in the playoffs. But this season he's had a down year, even though they're trying to give him more of an offensive role. The New York Knicks are the opposite of the Nationals. Their best players have regressed, but the rest of the team is actually stepping up. Harry the Horse Gallatin and Tricky Dick McGuire are still All-Stars. Harry the Horse is a 6-time All-Stars, which means he's been in every All-Star game up to this point. Former All-Stars Carl Braun and Ray Felix have also stepped up again, and Carl Braun was selected as an All-Star before his injury. Ray Felix was an All-Star snub. Harry the Horse Gallatin, as a 6-timer, gave us another solid season, but as you can see he was starting to go downhill in efficiency. Tricky Dick McGuire was the other active All-Star on the team. He managed to average 7, 4 and 6, which were his lowest numbers either in his career or in a very long time. Still an All-Star. Led the team in assists with 2 per game. The Celtics team already features one new All-Star addition in former 4-time All-Star for the Rochester Royals, Arnie Risen. Now he's washed, but he's here on the Celtics rebounding too. 6 out of the 10 players on this team would be on next year's championship team. 3 of those 6 players would win 4 championships in the next 5 years. Sharman, McCauley, and Cousy stand out as obviously they were the all-stars on the team. One of the first Celtics big threes. That tells you how good Bill Russell must have been, because later this year the Celtics traded a quality all-star in Ed McCauley and Cliff Hagan, who isn't even on this team yet, and he's a future all-star. Bob Cousy put up 19, 3 and 6. He's a beast. Look at his highlights. Now 27 years old, he is also a 6-time All-Star. Ed McCauley is having his best defensive season in 4 years. The Celtics are really good this year. Bill Sharman finishes off the big 3. 19, 2 and 4. He's also killing it this year, especially offensively. The reigning All-Star MVP just got better. This was his career high in minutes and in assists per game. The best team in the NBA this season was the Philadelphia Warriors. They were driven by 2 scoring machines in Paul Arizin and Neil Johnston. Both 3-time All-Stars before this selection, and a new All-Star. The assists leader on the team, Jack George. This team is led by Johnson and Arizin in most categories, but there's also Tom Gola, another All-Star snub. He is also out there too, especially defensively. Then Jack George leads the team in assists, and he has his first All-Star selection this year. This team won the championship with big help from Paul Arizin's scoring increase in the playoffs, but Neil Johnston's regular season stats looks better. He manages to keep up with Arizin's scoring while getting 3 less shots and defending the other team's best player. Neil Johnston, after leading the league in scoring 3 years in a row, he finally doesn't have to anymore. So instead of leading the league in scoring, he is leading the league in field goal percentage. This is his most resident season shooting and scoring the ball. Paul Arizin is also having a career-high field goal percentage year. In the playoffs, he's literally gonna be the best player. The Warriors are 56 champs cause of him. Jack George leads the NBA in minutes. The Warriors are first in the league, that's why he's an all-star. This is his career-high season in points and assists. He's a point guard that does whatever they need. He's defensive-minded, he's offensive-minded, he leads the team in assists. Most of those assists going to the big 2. Then he's also third in scoring behind them. Another guy who is an all-star for contributing to winning. So yes, the Warriors won the championship again this season, but that was later this season. Let's get back to the All-Star game, or just before it. Bob Pettit led the league in PR at that All-Star break. This is part of the reason why he won MVP this season too. PR is basically, add all the good things you did on the court, minus all the bad things. The East has a lot of better players according to this metric. And if you look closer, yes, Bob Pettit was only in the second season, but he was already him. And if we combine our win shares and PR graph, I'd say Neil Johnson and Bob Pettit were the two-headed monster of best player in the NBA this season. Offensively, Neil Johnston and Paul Harrison's points were leading to actual wins, while Maurice Stokes and Dolph Chase were holding their teams together with their defensive effectiveness. If you search up the 1956 All-Star Game, this is the first picture you will see, Bob Pettit receiving his All-Star MVP award. That's because at this game, Bob Pettit was the All-Star MVP. The West won their first game in 2 years. They won by 14 points. Pettit put up 20 points, 24 rebounds, a new record, and 7 assists in a single game. We also had really good games from Neil Johnson, 17, 10 and 1. Harry Gallatin, 16, 5 and 2. Maurice Stokes, 10, 16 and 2. Slater Martin, 9, 1 and 7 assists. And Dick McGuire, 6 points on 75% shooting and 3 assists. Last year, Bob Cousy became the first player to show up on all 3 main leaderboards for a single game. Bob Pettit becomes the first player to be first on all 3 main leaderboards for a game, making this, so far, the greatest All-Star Game performance ever. This was also the best rebounding game in All-Star Game history with 24 rebounds in one game. Finally, Bob Cousy overtook George Mikan for the number 1 spot in points all-time, by 1 point. And even Harry the Horse overtook George Mikan in rebounds all-time. Remember that George Mikan was an All-Star snub this year. And he probably could have taken all these records back this game if things were different. Yeah. That's everything about the 56 All-Stars and the All-Star Game. Like the video if you want to see more, follow Ballseasons everywhere. And special thanks to Basketball Reference, Sport Reference, and StatHead Basketball for the data and graphs and numbers. They were very helpful. Thanks for watching.